they're like, hey, listen, if you have a record, we can get you on a plane in like 10 days. And everyone, I was like the kind of core songwriter. So they all looked at me and were like, do you think you can write an additional 10 songs or something? And I was like, probably.
Welcome to Church Jams Now, the podcast where three former youth group kids and current music nerds deep dive into Christian music from the 90s and 2000s. I, of course, am your co-host, Kylan Savage. With me, as always, is Mr. TJ Smith.
Deep dive or deep dies? Josh dies?
Oh.
Is there something there? I don't know.
There's something there.
I don't know.
But
As
we're
soon
going
as
to
I
need you to
tried it,
show Bread your work.
Okay.
And, of course, we have beautiful producer Josh.
Man, I can't beat TJ's, so hi, I'm happy to be here too.
How are we going to differentiate between Joshes? We can't make it through this whole thing.
That's true.
That is true.
I think Josh Olson is going to have to get downgraded to Josh 2.
That's
I
fine.
think so.
That's
I
fine.
mean,
Just,
you're the
or
guest.
just Olsen, like his family name.
How
What's
about
on his
Josh
crest?
dies and Josh
That's
lives?
true. Yeah, we can call.
Oh.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah. I like all these ideas. I guess
Okay.
we'll have to keep workshopping it throughout the episode.
see which
Yeah,
one
we'll
wins
figure
out.
it out. Yeah.
See what bubbles up. And if you heard that other voice that was referring to the multiple Joshes of it all, that was the lovely Josh Porter, or as known in the Showbread context, Josh Dies. Welcome, Josh.
Josh won.
Yeah, sure. We can go with that.
I'm Josh 1. Then we're just going to get into number 1 and number 2, and then that's going to become a whole different thing.
That's true.
True.
Well, this is the right podcast for that, so that's fine.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for taking time to come talk to us.
Oh, yeah, dude. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're excited. We just covered, Josh, when this comes out, sorry, Josh Olson, Mr. Olson, Josh B. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Lowercase Josh.
Yeah. That's easier.
Where is this coming out in relation to our episode on No Sir?
I think it'll be like a surprise couple days after.
Oh, okay,
episode.
good.
Yeah.
Because I think I kept referencing this interview
It was
in that
mysterious.
episode.
And then I kept
Yeah.
shooting down the reference
I know.
very overtly.
Because it needs to be a surprise. I was just so excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we just covered that record in our typical CJN fashion, and we're very excited to just talk some music stuff with you.
Well, you have to give me the long and short of your opinions on the record, so I know what I'm dealing with.
It was a triple bop. It was a triple bop from us.
That's fair.
Which
Yep.
doesn't happen all the time.
We use bop and flop assessments, and so if it's a
I
triple
see.
bop, that's kind of a gold star system.
Yeah, that's like it's
from
like
us,
a rotten fresh matrix on Rotten
Yes,
Tomatoes.
exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Precisely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. We bopped it.
And it may or may not be a kind of a bigger record for TJ. I don't want to throw you under the bus, TJ, in our professional setting, but
TJ,
it's definitely
you
a very big
you like that
too.
record?
I do like that record. I've been a fan of you guys for some time, and in fact, Josh, not to put you on the spot, but we've met a handful of times. One of my old bands played with you guys at the Door in Dallas
Oh, The Door.
eons ago. Yeah,
I remember that
way
place.
back.
Yeah.
So
Awesome. Small world. Here we
yeah,
are.
Showbread's a big figure in my life as bands go. So
Wow, I'm honored.
I think we used to joke because the other Josh and I were in a Southern metal band, and people called us the best Maylene cover band in DFW, and we also joked that TJ's band was the best Showbread cover band in DFW.
Nice. Put them together, you got the best Maylene Showbread hybrid
Man,
I know.
cover band.
should
Yeah.
have
It's
done
true.
that. Yeah.
it'd be pretty
Should've
wild.
Joined forces.
Just start playing emo nights all across the country. So a big part of our show, like I said, we deep dive into Christian music from the 90s and 2000s. And so for us, a lot of this music was what we grew up listening to. And so I'm always fascinated by people's origin stories. So essentially, like, what kind of music did you grow up listening to? How did you get involved in ostensibly Christian music from the 90s and 2000s?
Well, I grew up in the deep South in rural Georgia, and grew up in a kind of like conservative Southern Baptist context. But it was an anomaly in that though my parents checked a lot of the boxes for kind of satanic panic or 80s and 90s Southern conservative Christian families, in that, we weren't allowed to watch The Simpsons, and my
Right.
parents were afraid of Dungeons and Dragons, that kind of thing. My parents were also unique in that my dad was like a 70s Southern rocker guy with a
Okay,
background,
nice.
and he was a music lover. My mom was a literature enthusiast. She was a school teacher for decades. So in those two respective realms, there were a lot of permission. So my dad would
Right.
sort of sneak Queen and Aerosmith records to my brother and I when we were young. So we had, like a copy of A Night at the Opera and Aerosmith's Toys in the Attic. And my mom would sneak me copies of, novels by Sylvia Plath and Franz Kafka, even though they wouldn't pass the bar
Right.
for our church context, but they either just were enthusiastic about these things, or they saw some kind of value in them and were like, well, whatever. Let's just listen to Aerosmith.
I love the subversive parent backstory.
That's what I was going to say.
That's really great.
That's what I was going to say. So were your parents aware of each other sharing these types of art with you? Because I imagine it just like this like sneaky art ecosystem where everyone's like...
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. I think that neither one fully understood the other person's tastes, but there was a certain level of respect and a certain level of trepidation. So my dad bought me my first quote unquote secular album on cassette tape, which was Aerosmith's Get a Grip.
Nice.
And he bought me a copy at Walmart, and on the way home in his pickup truck, he handed it to me, and he said, "Don't tell your mom." And
That's great.
my mom, I think that sometimes I'd read these novels that she would find for me, or be like, if you like that one, you should try this one. And she and I would talk about them, and my dad would be like, what is this crazy stuff that you're giving him to read? So there was some level of awareness, but there was also a certain level of like, oh, I don't know about that, but maybe it was kind of an unspoken agreement. Listen, you gave him the Queen record, I'll give him this.
Yeah, I love that
trade-off.
Yeah.
That's
great.
Awesome. So I know like most interview shows really like dig into this section. So I just want to kind of briefly move past it so we can get on to the questions we all really want to ask. Can you talk briefly about the origin of Showbread and how you guys kind of all got together?
Yeah, well, so having grown up in a context where there's like the Christian world of quote unquote contemporary Christian pop culture, but there's a certain overlap in contemporary culture with two capital C's, meaning, we had MTV on cable, and my parents weren't crazy about it, but we'd turn it on or try to like see how much of it we could get away with. So my brother and I grew up in junior high during the kind of advent of alternative rock and skate punk were the two big things. So bands like Offspring on Epitaph Records and Green Day, Dookie was the album at the time,
Right.
were mainstream popular rock records, even though, Offspring in particular, their record Smash, which was the big hit at the time, was an indie record. It was like made on nickels, and that was how we got our first exposure to punk rock music. But it wasn't honestly until Tooth and Nail Records that we discovered what one might describe as like credible punk rock music.
Right. Yeah.
It kind of went the other way around. Rather than starting in the Christian bubble and then branching out of it to discover authentic punk rock, we started in the mainstream, like MTV, weekend countdown of Offspring, Green Day, bands like, Bush and Nirvana. And then someone on a youth camp gave me a copy of Pocanatcha, the first MXPX record.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
And my brother and I were both like really taken with how aggressive and to us authentic it sounded. To us it was more aggressive, more abrasive than a band like Offspring or Green Day. And that led us into a world of like, well, what are these guys listening to? In the liner notes of Pocanatcha, there's a photo of, I can't remember exactly, so I'm gonna bot it, but it's like one of the guys is wearing like a Rancid t-shirt, or someone has like a NoFX t-shirt, and we honestly were just like, those sound like bands. Maybe those bands are cool. So we go to the record store and we bought a Rancid record and a NoFX record. So it was Tooth and Nail Records that led us into I guess what you might describe as like authentically underground or obscure art rock and punk rock music. My brother and I had aspired to be in some kind of rock band ever since we were small children. Ever since my dad gave us a copy of, A Night at the Opera, we're like, we should have a band.
Yeah.
So that kind of aspiration went through all sorts of different shapes over the years. When we first heard we got the self-titled DC Talk album on cassette, and we're like, we should have a Christian hip hop band,
Yeah.
and the two of us would write raps together. And then we got into some of the more, I guess the Christian rock music that we had access to was either kind of like pop alternative at the time, or it would have been like, glam, like Petra, like a glam metal adjacent. I don't want to
hair metal.
Yeah. The kind of
like
hair
Striper,
metal,
that kind of stuff.
Striper, White Heart, White
Totally.
Cross, those kinds of bands. And we loved them. We were like, well, we should have a hard band because every dimension, like every time the bubble expanded to include something that seemed to us like a little more, I don't want to say extreme, but like hard, edgier, or something. We'd be like, whoa, I didn't know that something was harder than this or louder than this or more abrasive than this. And that sort of climaxed in discovering punk rock through Tooth and Nail Records. And we had cooked up a kind of half-baked youth group band called Showbread that mostly learned covers of alternative era Third Day, and this is going to sound like a really weird reference, but the first Skillet record was kind of like a Nirvana copycat. I don't mean that, and I don't mean that as like a dig. I'm sure that they would probably admit it was like a Nirvana copycat record. So we were learning those kinds of songs and just playing for fun at our youth group. So it's the kind of band that probably should have changed names like 7 times, but it never did. It would just amass different
it was just
people.
Too good of a name. You had to keep it the whole time.
It's just absolutely terrible. There was a brief moment when we signed with Tooth and Nail Records that our A&R director said, if you're ever going to change this awful name, now is the time to do it. And I wanted desperately to change the name. We made an agreement that if we did, it would have to be unanimous. I wanted to change the name of the band to the Bell Jar, and one dude, John Giddens, voted against it.
JG,
JG threw the vote, and it stayed Showbread, the worst name.
I love imagining like a 12 Angry Men style like argument where you guys are just like locked in a room.
I
change your name from Showbread.
As emotionally immature a person as I was at the time, and I was severely emotionally immature, I knew that the right approach would never be to go in hostile. So I was as much as I could trying to like be a salesman, to be amicable, and like we circled up outside of a venue in Sacramento because it was like the deadline to change the name before they announced the signing or something like that. And I was like, please, God, please. I had all these great reasons that I'd cooked up that we could explain what the new name would mean and why. And we went around the circle, yay or nay. And it was yay, 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 yay. And it got to JG and he said, nay. So that was that.
That's wild. That's so funny.
That's so good.
In a way, I'm grateful for JG because I feel like something about y'all's quirky name was part of what made it so endearing to me. And like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't explain it, but I don't know that I would have fallen as hard for a band called the Bell Jar.
Right.
Like, even though I probably should have.
Yeah,
sure.
But I think it spoke to like weird, goofy kids like us that were like a little bit pretentious, but still also goofy. It's like, oh, this is like the perfect balance.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's no good way to, I mean, like it had some kind of dated youth group meaning. But to explain, it's just like, look, man, it's just a bad name. I tried to change it. It's too late now.
How do you feel about it now, though?
I don't have. I mean, if I had it to go back, I still would change it.
Still would change,
but it doesn't. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't keep me up at night or anything. It's fittingly humbling.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
I mean, to be fair, not many bands like their names. So you're in you're in good company.
That's true. Yeah,
Bryce, totally. Jimmy Eat World, all of them.
But a lot of bands have much better names nowadays. People they say why did you call your band Showbread? We say, because the Butthole Surfers was taken, or insert
Great
better
answer.
band name.
Right.
Great answer.
Well, I mean, yeah, you can't beat that. I mean, that might be the
Yeah,
best
that's
band
it.
name of all time.
Yeah, that's the apex of band naming.
Yeah, it really is.
Yep.
Okay, lowercase Josh or TJ, do we have what's next on the docket? Where are we going now? Where is this path taking us?
I mean, I think, are we ready to just jump into the record?
Yeah,
I do have a question that I would love to start off with.
cool.
Let's do it.
And it was the decision to go with Sylvia Massey.
Yes,
Because
I want to know
that was-
everything about that.
Yes, because from what I could find, there was only one other Tooth and Nail artist, the Fighting Jacks, that had done a record with her before and maybe since that I found. So she stands out from like the Tooth and Nail sound and the
Right.
normal
The
producers
Matt
that y'all
Goldman,
work
Aaron
with.
Sprinkle, like,
Yeah, so
like
so
the
I would love
usual
to know
guys.
more about that, and then obviously just like fun stories from what y'all did, because you mentioned like how experimental that recording session was, and so I'm just very curious about all that.
Well, I think getting to work with Sylvia is one of the great blessings of my life and creative, career, if you like.
Yeah,
It was a semi-accident in that the process of us actually signing the papers and recording they were like a week apart. So we had negotiated this contract for, I don't know, some number of months. They had made their intentions to sign us clear, and then it went into some kind of, like, I don't know, we had a lawyer or something. They were looking at a contract, and none of it was big or made that much difference to us pragmatically, but it was the kind of thing like, oh, they have this little clause in here, I'd like them to change that. And we're like, whatever, sure. So while we're negotiating the contract, Tooth and Nail is trying to make plans to record an album and project a release date and all that kind of stuff. And Tooth and Nail had perfected a formula with, like you guys pointed out, a handful of trustworthy producers that was like, that you'll give us a record for this much money, it'll be turned
Right.
around in this much time, we'll spend X amount of dollars promoting it, and it either will or won't be successful based on the band's work ethic, was essentially
Right.
the Tooth and
Kinda
Nail
copy
formula.
paste.
Yeah, for better or for worse. So every now and then you had just a tremendous level of success for bands like Under Oath, for example,
Right.
or that managed to, in part because of a work ethic, and probably in part because of serendipity, because of chaos circumstances. Who knows?
Right.
They were in the right place at the right time. Their music caught on with a certain audience, but Tooth and Nail didn't necessarily pitch unique promotion plans to different bands. It was kind of
Yeah,
like, we
yeah.
do what we do. It'll either work for you or it won't. So I think that there were conversations about working with someone like Goldman, or Barry Pointer was another big producer for Tooth and Nail. And as I recall, Goldman was in Georgia, which is where we were stationed. And he had worked with other bands that were kind of adjacent to us or local to us, like the Chariot or Norma Jean or something like that. And so that was a conversation as well. But we, not because we're too good for this, but we had all these lofty aspirations that we wanted to work with, the producers responsible for The Shape of Punk to Come, or we wanted to work
Yeah,
with
yeah.
Dave Fridman, who worked on with the Flaming Lips. We had, and Tooth and Nail's like, we don't
Nice.
know, we don't know any
these
of these
people,
people.
yeah.
And so they're like, what are you guys talking about? But then our A&R director was like, hey, listen, there is this one lady. She has an incredible discography, and she made a record for us. That record had flopped, apparently. But she did a record for us. She did a really good job. She's relatively inexpensive. She's, I think she was willing to work with different budgets. And her name's Sylvia Massey. Now, we didn't know Sylvia, but we knew the records she had made. So
Yeah.
we were like, what? Who's this lady? And we looked her up and we're like, are you kidding me? She worked
Oh,
on the first
yeah.
Tool record, and she worked
Yeah.
with Johnny Cash, and she was Rick Rubin's
Rubin.
protege. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So of course we were instantly like, oh my God, please, we'll do anything,
Yes.
and they were
It
like,
has
really?
to be Sylvia.
Yeah, exactly. So it was like we signed the contract. 5 days later, got on a plane to fly to California and start
Wow.
recording with Sylvia.
That's what. So you basically like you hadn't met her, you just
Nope.
kind of just
Nope.
saw that discography and were like, yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
That's awesome.
And we knew we wanted someone who didn't make like post-hardcore records.
Right.
Yeah, we wanted someone who, like understood what it took to make like a Tool record or a Prince record, like
Yeah,
that kind of
exactly.
thing, and would not approach it like the producer of a punk album.
Yeah.
Yeah, but bring some different sensibilities to the table.
Exactly. Yeah.
To help y'all.
Yeah. And we had demoed 3 songs for Tooth and Nail, which were, as I recall, Dead by Dawn, So Selfish It's Funny, and The Smokers and Children Shall Be Cast Down. Stabbing Art to Death was a song that was on our kind of indie album, Life Kisses and Other Wasted Efforts. So those 4 songs were written. The rest of the album didn't exist. So I think it was written in like 10 days, 7 to 10 days.
That's insane.
Our approach was, they're like, hey, listen, if you have a record, we can get you on a plane in like 10 days. And everyone, I was like the kind of core songwriter. So they all looked at me and were like, do you think you can write an additional 10 songs or something? And I was like, probably. And I
Hold my beer, guys.
Yeah. Well, I think that level of like amateurishness and naivete was actually wonderfully helpful. Because I didn't look at it like this impossible undertaking or like, well, what is the concept of the album? It was just like, yeah, I guess so. And so the formula was every night I would go in, the room where Patrick and Mike and I lived together, and with an acoustic guitar, and I'd write a song. And then the next day, everyone came into the garage to rehearse, and I'd be like, "Here's the new one." We'd all play it together, and then be like, "Great!" And then that evening, we'd pack it up. I'd go inside, write another one, bring it in. So it wasn't like I was completing these songs in every single detailed aspect. It was more like, I'd sing it for them on an acoustic guitar, and I'd be like, and then maybe this part can kind of go like this, and each person would take their unique contributions, or they would make their unique contributions. Sylvia, I think, had been mailed a CDR demo of the 3 songs that we had demoed for Tooth and Nail, the 3 songs that got us signed. And that demo was kind of rough around the edges. I'm sure you could find it online. And she was like, okay, yeah, cool. We can make something work with this. But then we set up on stage, all of us together playing in a room. She had kind of renovated an old theater into a studio. There's footage of this online as well. And so we're all on stage and we played. I had already established the order of the record. And so we just started playing the songs, beginning with A Llama Eats a Giraffe. And immediately, like, we played A Llama Eats a Giraffe, and she was like, that wasn't on the demo. And we're like, no. And she's like, play another one. So we played her, Dead by Dawn, or we started to play through the record in sequence. And she turned around to her engineering partner, Rich Veltrup, who's worked on all our records. And she was like, dude, we could have a lot of fun with this album.
Yeah.
And so I think she was so delighted by how excited we were, enthusiastic we were about experimenting in the studio. I think a lot of bands, especially established bands, have a lot of preconceived ideas about, like, no, we want to do it this way. We don't want to try weird stuff. And we were like, oh yeah, we'll try whatever. So, and we did.
Yeah.
We tried.
Not only a blank canvas, but also an enthusiastic, stoked blank canvas.
Yes. Yeah. So, and they loved it. I think that both of them, in a really honest, authentic way, were like, what if we did, like, we set drums up outside in the street and recorded them through a glass window, or what if we,
did that make it on the record?
Yeah. And some of these.
What song is that?
I think that the the drum set in the street is on So Selfish It's Funny.
Nice.
Or on the bell jar. So they did let me name a song.
Oh, cool.
The bell jar.
There you go.
And things like, she had all Tom Petty's guitars, and we lined them up in a row, and we used like 3 different guitars on one song. A lot of, and I don't mean this in any kind of like dig or we're better kind of way, but a lot of our contemporaries, which I guess would have been like metalcore bands. We weren't a metalcore band, but those kinds of bands, they had their approach, which is like, we've got these Schecter guitars and Mesa heads or 5150s. and we we tuned them down to C or whatever, and
Right.
but we were like the weird post-hardcore band that had like Fenders and Marshalls, and we're playing like twangy Strats and
No,
stuff
you
like
can
that.
tell. I love it. I think that was one of my big notes on a lot of the songs on that record. I'm like, oh yeah, no, you could definitely tell they're playing a Fender right here. It's like so thin, and twangy, and like the
and
best way.
standard tuning, like you're
And
not in
standard
drop
tuning,
D or
yeah.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, which I think is what made, and that those things later on in our career, we did do things in an effort to be different. And I mean that in a good way. Like we would consciously think through like, well, how can we do things not the way that a band like this would do them? But all those things came naturally because we all shared a certain aesthetic sensibility. And even though we intended to be a punk band or like an experimental punk band, but a punk band. But our guitar players, like one of them was his favorite artist is Tom Petty. The other guy's like really into Queen. So they picked their guitar tones and based on the artists that they like, and then imported them, into this band where they shouldn't have fit. But we didn't know any better. We were just like, cool, a Stratocaster,
Yeah. No, I think that makes for the most interesting music when people bring their own like disparate influences.
Yes, and when you have a group of 7 people, you're going to have a lot of variety and layers of sounds.
Yeah,
which is going to create a diverse record.
Yes,
awesome.
and we were blessed at the time with, even though the band was so big, there was like a kind of a core palette that was shared by everyone. Everyone in the band was a huge fan of Refused, the early like AFI records, when they were more like a traditional hardcore band.
Yeah.
And we're all into, kind of the classic rock influences that colored the sonic palette of that record. But then everyone had these other eclectic influences that they, I had this background in like goth industrial music, and electronic music that colored kind of the synthesizers and drum machines on the record. JG was the only guy in the band who actually liked hardcore music. He listened to like, but he would bring those ideas into the band. He'd be like, well, on this Earth Crisis record, there's this really heavy part, and he would play it for us, and we'd be like, oh, none of us listened to Earth Crisis, but we would be like, oh, that does sound cool. We could use that on this part. So there was a wonderful open-mindedness in that we approached the songwriting the same way we'd written all songs before then, which is just like I'd come into the garage with a random collection of, like riffs in order and some lyrics, and then everyone would kind of fill it out. So it wasn't actually written as deliberately as a record, and more just like, oh crap, we need 10 more songs.
Yeah.
And
it was a necessary experiment in songwriting in a tight window of time, and that became a record.
Yeah, totally. And Sylvia, at one point, I think it was when we were recording So Selfish It's Funny, she turned around because it's one of those songs. A lot of the songs on that record have like 1 or 2, maybe 3 different BPMs. Some of them change
linear
time signatures.
Like suites. Movements.
That's what I actually did have a question about that.
Okay.
In terms of when y'all recorded this record, did y'all all play to a click? And did y'all just spend a lot of time in pre-production just mapping out all of those tempo changes? And like this is something like I know is like it's done, and it for some reason I'm just such a like straightforward songwriter. It like blows my mind thinking about tempo and time signature changes with a click.
Yeah. Well, it was done like extremely DIY and rough around the edges. Sylvia obviously is in the habit of using a click, and we had attempted and failed to use clicks on our DIY recordings. Marvin, who played drums on Nihilism and Age of Reptiles, and is probably the best drummer I've ever known. I've known a lot of really talented drummers.
He's absolute unit.
And he's one of those musicians that's just like effortlessly awesome. I mean, not to say that he didn't put any work into it. He practiced, but like he had a gift. He had a wonderful gift, and it was kind of carved out with us, like learning to play together. So it was really tailored to our aesthetic. the way, I mean, just even the way that he played, he's like really hit him hard, and
Yeah.
Yes.
and his influences were like Stephen Drozd from the Flaming Lips, like a really, and which is why then you've got this guy who plays in a punk band who's got just a floor tom, a snare, a crash, and a
Yes.
hi-hat.
I loved how simple his setup was.
Yeah, and one reason was because as shallow as it sounds, it looks cool, and we were like, man, when we saw it, we're
It's
like,
true.
man, that looks cool. And we were, like a really aesthetic forward band.
For sure.
We thought that the presentation, the visual presentation was an extra dimension of the music, not something kind of unique to the music.
Right.
Yeah.
So Marvin, he used that small kit. Like there's no like rack toms and stuff like that on Nihilism. He used he used his small kit, and Sylvia came and messed with it some, but he had not been able to, because he's so bombastic. In the past, we'd never practiced with the click. He'd never played to a click. And we were terrified. We're like, she's going to make us use a click. We didn't want to use a click, not just because it was hard to do, but because Nirvana didn't use a click. Like in Utero, there's no click track. And so in our minds, a click is not cool. It's lame.
Right.
And Sylvia's like, I understand, but these songs are so bananas that like overdubs are going to be a nightmare if we don't have them locked in. So, but then we turned on, she used like an Alesis drum machine, because we recorded the drums on tape as opposed to digitally. And she hooked up this Alesis drum machine on a cowbell setting,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and then he started going, and we discovered that he could suddenly do it. He was like perfectly locked in. We don't know what happened, if it was like the Holy Spirit or some kind of like serendipitous, like something clicked in his brain. But he was perfect. I mean, like he absolutely, and he was free. That freed him up to be like, oh, I'll try this. And if Sylvia said, you know what if you changed this part, and instead of worrying about like, oh, I don't know, this is gonna mess with me and my timing, he was locked in effortlessly and then could experiment with his own parts. When we discovered, because we were also amateurs, nobody in Showbread was like a music theory person or anything like with any kind of formal background. So Sylvia would stop us and be like, okay, so I'm counting 3 different BPMs in this song so far. So what we would do is like we would play up to a change, and then she's like, I'm going to, on the beat, change the tempo on this Alesis drum machine. And so Selfish It's Funny is a great example of one that I just remember off the top of my head. There's a moment near the bridge of the song where it's kind of this upbeat da 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 da, and then it suddenly goes ba na 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 and slows down.
Yeah, like Motown.
And so then she suddenly just switched it. It would be like click 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 click, and he would just change with it. Yeah,
crazy. Way to go, Marvin.
I don't even understand that.
He's incredible. He's incredible. I just the other day, I sent him a message out of nowhere, unsolicited message, and was like, "You are the best drummer in the world." He just sent back smiley face.
Humble too.
Yeah,
sounds right.
So wait just like a year or so and send him another unsolicited message and say these 3 random podcasters also agree.
Yeah,
you're the best drummer.
Then it'll probably be like winky smiley face.
Wink smile. Yeah. Level up.
Have you been listening to the new Pedro the Lion record?
I've heard a couple singles.
Yes, it's incredible.
Yeah, what do you love about it, Kyla?
I love the autobiographical nature of the songs and how it's a continuation of the previous 2 albums, in which he also wrote a bunch of incredibly deep and personal autobiographical songs.
That's true.
If I'm being honest, I haven't listened to it yet.
Oh,
which Josh knows.
I think that's perfectly okay, Kylan. You're probably just waiting until your record comes in.
Yep.
And where else is a better place to buy the record of the new Pedro the Lion record and many, many other Pedro the Lion records other than
Amazon.com?
No.
Wait a minute.
I don't think so. Not here, Jeff Bezos. He did try to sponsor us, and we
Get
said
behind
no.
me,
We
Jeff.
shut him down. Shut him down.
Behind me, Bezos.
Good. But you know who we gladly promote on this show is Collide Records.
CollideRecords.com.
They got so much music.
I know.
yo.
They have the new Santa Cruz.
I know.
By Pedro the Lion.
And they've got the last 2 records, Phoenix and Havasu, if you don't have those. And they've got a lot of the other Pedro stuff that has been repressed. Only Reason, Control, Achilles Heel. So if you're big Pedro fans, even if you're like us, or even if you're not Pedro fans, they got plenty of other stuff on their store to check out. And if you do, is there something that you can do special if you listen to the show?
Yes, guess what?
What?
You don't have to pay full price. If you're a fan of this show,
How do you do that?
you use your fingers,
Okay.
go to
Okay,
colliderecords.com. Hold on. I got to find the full URL because we all know this is how this works. Yeah, hold on. https://colliderecords.com/collections/Pedro-the-Lion. You can find all of your Pedro the Lion and David Bazan audio needs met. And if you use your fingers at checkout, type in Church James Now, how much do you think you would get off? Like, guess a number. 1 to 20. 5.
25. 25 what? Cents? Yeah, 25 cents.
Yes,
a
you get
quarter.
25
I think you would
cents
get
off.
a quarter.
I think that's a good deal. I mean, that cuts down.
Guess what? I got an
Shipping
even
costs.
better deal for you.
No.
Guess a number
What is it?
from 18 to 20.
19.
Guys, you're so bad at this. Guess a number from 19 and a half to 20.
I'm guessing 20.
Ding, ding, ding.
Is it 20?
You win. You get 20% off your purchase.
What? That's awesome.
That's a great deal right there. You can save some major cash that way.
So if you go to colliderecords.com, pick a record, any record, guys. It's like a magic trick. At checkout, type in Church James Now. You'll get 20% off your purchase, which is amazing. Collide Records. Craig, thank you. You guys are rad. We do these ads where we talk about reviews that we have received. But man, oh man, okay, we received a review that I feel like as an organization and personally,
Let's be clear. I feel like it was more on a personal level.
No, as an organization, I am speaking for Church James Now as an entity. We felt we needed to address. So Josh,
I can agree with that part. I can agree that we do need to address it.
Yes.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Celebrate it even.
Well,
Yeah, sure.
all right.
Why not?
We will get there. Josh, would you be so kind as to read this review?
Yes, I will. We have a new review, and it's from JABLVA. Title
All
of-
right, we're already mangling facts.
Jabulva? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for that. I'm just so excited to get to the review. But the title of the review, it says fun listen, and it's 4 stars.
Okay.
The review goes, I love that this podcast exists. Don't agree with a lot of the opinions, but that makes it interesting too. However, ... To the host who hates bongos in quotes, please learn the difference between bongos, congas, and djembes. Not every skinned hand drum is a bongo. End rant. Thanks for making these.
Okay, listen. All right. Let's just okay. Listen.
I just want to say, I love that he starts with, I love that this podcast exists, and then closes with, thanks for making these.
Yes.
The perfect
okay,
segue.
but let's
TJ, on a personal level, for a moment, just wants to say thanks for those opening and closing lines.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Jabberwocky.
No, thank you for all of
I
it.
appreciate you.
Nope. Shut it all down. The review system is rigged.
You have the floor.
Can I have the soapbox, please?
Yeah, let me go grab it. Here you go,
okay.
buddy.
As the host who hates quote unquote bongos, we did talk about this actually recently on the Kevin Max episode, correct? Mm-hmm. I did go off on a similar rant. For all listeners of Church James Now, I would like to apologize for my flippant language regarding bongos and other hand skin drums. Of course, as someone who started out playing in a church band on bongos, congas, a djembe, etc.
Cajon, perhaps?
A cajon, yes. I do understand the difference between multiple hand percussion instruments. That being said, sometimes with language, right? Like a lot of times we get really nitty-gritty on this show, right? Like we get pretty specific about guitar tones and production techniques and things like that. So I want to apologize for the shortcut that I have taken in simply using the term bongos as a layman's term, as a term that I thought everyone understood could be a stand-in for hand percussion. And I'm incredibly sorry for the hurt that I have caused anyone by thinking that I do not have the ability to distinguish between different types of hand drums. I, of course, know the difference between bongos and congas.
And djembes.
And djembes.
They mentioned, yes. Okay.
Kylan, is now a good time for me to admit that was my review, that I left under a different username?
Oh, well, I quit.
Thank you for your apology.
So much sense.
Bye, I'm done. I'm done. That's it. End of our friendship.
Oh, no, not
and
again.
if you want your review to be read on the show and for Kylan to have a redactionary statement, leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
Let's get back to the show. TJ, do you have any questions? I'm so excited for TJ questions on this. TJ is our resident professor philosopher, is what we call him.
Ooh.
So this feels like a
Yeah.
Hit me, TJ. Come on.
Amateurish at best, Josh. But I do feel like I'm in good company having you on the show, so it's pretty cool. I may be giving you more credit than you're due, so feel free to let me down. Because you kind of alluded to this a second ago. You said you weren't like zooming out and trying to get high level conceptual or heady with the concept of the record. But in our episode where we cover this record, I shared with the guys that I have this headcanon, because you start it with the vintage dial phone, right? And the conversation between the two people. And then you end the record with the dial tone glitching out in that really crazy, frenetic style.
Yep.
So in my mind, the whole thing is a conversation on the phone. And I projected out that it was like, it could be between some protagonist or narrator, character and anyone. And I don't know if I really clarified that in our episode, so I want to add that amendment that it could be a protagonist, character, and anyone, and bringing in all these disparate characters and your Kafka and your Sylvia Plath and what have you. But I sort of projected out that it was like a conversation between yourself and God in a sense. And so you don't have to say yes, but just answer the nonsensical rambling sentence that I just threw at you.
Yeah,
whatever that makes you think of, however that inspires you. Like, what do you think?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
I think
Thanks.
you're very, very clear. And
because it was wild to hear that you just wrote these songs in sequence just because you had to write them and not because you were like, this is the work.
This is the concept, and we're going to
from the start
work into that.
Yeah. Like something that Matt Davis, who played on Nihilism and Reptiles and Anorexia Nervosa, he said something during the process about like, well, you say you've got your whole life to write your first record and you've got like 2 years to write your second record.
Yes.
And so in that sense, like it is the culmination of years and years of Showbread. And so a lot, it was written, or at least the bulk of it was written in like 10 days. But that's it, musically, lyrically and conceptually or thematically, I might say, like,
right.
I've always looked at all the records as if like, okay, what is the narrative of the record? I approach all the albums like concept records, and some of them are like really traditional concept records. Cancer and Anorexia Nervosa being the examples, but from Nihilism, Age of Reptiles, all of those things, and it's probably more obvious on something like Age of Reptiles, but I thought that the linear nature of it that so astutely recognized would be something that was really obvious to everyone, and it hasn't been. Like the whole record's designed as a phone call that begins with the dialing at the beginning and concludes with the beep 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 at the end. And it was at a time when I think that like I was reading about and considering nihilism in particular, not as like an attractive idea to me at all, but just something that was interesting.
Right.
You're
And
fascinated by it.
yeah, I was really fascinated by it. And I was reading a lot of like pop novelists that dealt with nihilism in a fun, like Chuck Palahniuk in Fight Club is the
Yeah.
easy example.
It was in vogue at that time, right?
It was, yeah.
Like,
It was
there were
really
a lot of
popular.
people latching onto it because it was in the pop culture.
It was, and there was a great quote from a literary critic in like a mainstream publication about Chuck Palahniuk that said, he makes nihilism fun. And I agree.
Yep.
But I thought at the time, like, wow, what an interesting thing to say. And so the title itself, I don't know exactly. I remember when it came to me, and it was during those 10 days of writing, because I was trying to find the through line. A few songs had already been written, and at least one of them didn't really fit in the proper sense, meaning Dead by Dawn. It's a song about movies,
Right.
which I looked at as almost like a Misfits tribute. It's just like singing a silly song about horror movies.
Yeah.
But I was looking back into what I'd written and already said in songs like Stabbing Art to Death and this, So Selfish It's Funny and The Smokers and Children had already been written, and trying to pick up on anything in the voice that I could like expand. And that theme of nihilism kept coming up, or nihilism as an idea that can't be applied consistently. So I wondered if it was like, what if it was a conversation or a consideration, like, so in the phone call, which was scripted, one person is advocating for nihilism and the other person thinks that it isn't practical. And then the songs are in essence the conversation before they conclude in the bell jar. And the last line of the bell jar is, everything is dying and we want something more.
Something more. Yep.
Yeah. Which means that the person considering nihilism has been left disappointed. So and I thought that ending it on like a bleak in the sense that the person on the other end of the conversations hasn't been fulfilled by their worldview, but hopeful in the sense that I've in all our records I've used them not as excuses, because that implies some level of inauthenticity, but like the thing that my mind goes to instantly and always is like, well, how do I use these things to come to grips with what I think is true about the world and life? And so in my worldview as a Christian, as a disciple of Jesus, brings all those things into the conversation, which I've always thought that they're, I don't know, I want to say like conventional, but we're always that band that's like, well, it's Christian, I guess, because they say Jesus a lot,
Right.
but is it Christian? Because like there's also these really grotesque like word pictures and I didn't think, like later on pursuing controversy on purpose became like a pastime. Like it was fun and and I appreciate that aesthetically, but on nihilism there wasn't any ulterior motive like, ooh, what kind of dicey thing can we say?
You weren't trying to be provocative for provocation's sake.
Right.
You were genuinely like intrigued
this is something
by
that
this.
interests me and I want to talk about it.
And it was my first rodeo. So I honestly didn't know that there would be conversations about like, hey, listen, the Christian bookstores don't like this one. So that kind of thing. I was like, oh, really? So I went into it very like, it wasn't crafted on a corkboard with red thread, but during those sessions, as I was writing lyrics, and I'd sit down with Ivory and I'd be like, okay, well, you sing these parts, I'll sing these parts, and the two of us would have conversations about like, what is it? What are we saying, and what do you think would be important to say? And to me, those are the kind of records that I like aesthetically. I like records that are more conceptually fleshed out, as opposed to, I also like albums, I just cited Misfits. So I like albums that are just like song 1, song 2, song 3, time and place. Ahead. Yeah. But the kinds of records, like the, Nine Inch Nails and David Bowie, the kinds of artists that would like think of a record as a record, You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I just have to say, this feels, in the 4 years of doing this show, it feels incredibly validating for TJ, who almost every episode, almost every album, whether it works or not, proposes to us how it could ostensibly be a concept record.
It's true. I'm always
how his
finding
brain
them.
works.
It's only more fuel for his fire.
Yeah, and it's great. And he's super articulate about it. And by the end of it, I'm always just like, well, yeah, this is like, of course this is a concept record. And it's great to hear from you, Josh, that he was pretty on the money.
Yeah, man, dead ringer. Way to go.
Sick.
You got it.
Thanks, man.
Awesome.
I mean, it helps when you're like a super fan of the band since you were 16.
Yeah, that's true.
No, I get it.
Spend a lot of time
And
on
it's
the
not
blocks.
like Mercy Me, where you have to where you have to craft a narrative just to be able to like get through the entire album.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yep. Lowercase Josh, do you have a question?
I did want to ask. Yeah, great transition, Kylan. On the essay for the No Sir album vinyl, which I have, I want to say,
Lovely.
There it
Lovely.
is. That's got to happen every episode too. Josh is the physical media guy.
Yeah. You did mention where Tooth and Nail gave you all the note about on So Selfish It's Funny about cutting everything like after that 211 mark. And I was curious if y'all got any other, and you mentioned that was like a pretty big moment for the band, like deciding if we're going to go with that or not. And I was curious if y'all got any other notes. And because like you were saying, there's a lot of like provocateur on this record. If y'all had any other notes from the label or like pushback, like specific things, or like, hey, do you guys really, should you do this Evil Dead song kind of thing? Like, I don't know, is there anything else on this record that y'all encountered when you were either getting ready to make it or after y'all had made it that anyone was pushing back on?
There were notes. I will say that the process was wonderful. Our A&R director at Tooth and Nail, Chad Johnson, he's still a good friend of mine to this day. Our relationship with the label and the folks who worked there, I mean, right down to the mailroom, we loved it. We loved them. I think that they liked us for the most part. I'm sure there was somebody who worked at Tooth and Nail that was like, this band sucks. But as is appropriate, not everybody likes everything. But for the most part, like every tour, we made a point to like go through Seattle so that we could go to the Tooth and Nail office and hang out. Everyone was always so receptive and kind to us. And when we had like just begun, before it was even mixed, we were sending the label kind of board mixes from the studio. And when we'd go to Seattle afterward, they're like, oh my God, dude, this record, like people at the label from Brandon at the very top all the way down to, in the mailroom were extremely supportive. So the overwhelming sense that we got was they like it. They like it. They like us. There were notes. The incident was So Selfish It's Funny that I cite in the essay is that, like I said earlier, there's the moment where the BPM changes and the song essentially becomes another song. It starts off as this kind of like almost like Hives-esque garage punk kind of thing. And then it turns into this Motown thing. And then it becomes a third song after that.
Yeah.
And that wasn't like some kind of clever, like, ooh, I'm going to write songs that become three different things. It was just honestly amateurish, like, oh, and then I have this other riff that maybe I could stick it on there, and people would be like, it's not the same key. It's like, that's fine. We'll just travel up the neck of the guitar till you get to the And I don't think that they disliked it because it was experimental. They just recognized that if the song didn't change, it would be really straightforward. It had an anthemic, catchy chorus. And if we could sort of end it within the world in which it was established, there would be another single on the record. As it stood, the only single was Mouth Like a Magazine. They felt like Mouth Like a Magazine was a really, really strong single. And there was not only not another single, but there was no other strong single, at all. So, and we didn't disagree. We understood. It's like that song or Mouth Like a Magazine stood out as like, oh, this is really accessible, at least comparatively to the other songs in the record.
For sure.
And so Chad had called us and he didn't say like, hey, listen, you got it. There was no pressure. There was no like weird mind games. He just said, listen, it is what it is. If you change it, we'll have a second single. If we have a second single, the people in the marketing department are probably going to be more enthusiastic about working on it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It's you're going to make their job easier, and that can be a good thing. He's like, it's up to you. You don't have to do it, but that's where we're at. And so we all went outside the studio and stood in a circle on the sidewalk and had a conversation. And there was really genuine like internal conflict. People felt as if artistic compromise feels yucky,
Right.
but there is like, if there is a way to make the people who are responsible for making the record a success more enthusiastic about the record, that can contribute to the longevity of our career. We can make more
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
it wasn't just like a sellout kind of thing. It was more like a shrewd career decision in a
Right.
sense.
Yeah. You start thinking politics, but like in a grown up way, right?
Yeah,
like an adult,
totally.
like this is
Yeah.
this is how adult relationships and business work.
Yep. And it's a conversation we'd never been made to have before that moment. And I remembered, this story about, my creative hero, Trent Reznor, when he turned in The Downward Spiral, which is my favorite album, to Interscope. He famously told them, I'm sorry.
Just apologize.
Yeah. And he said, sorry, I had to do it. It is what it is. And he said, I don't think there's no single. Sorry about that. And this is after the success of Pretty Hate Machine, which had been a multi-platinum record and had like a hole and down in it. So and Interscope chose Closer, which is one of the most obscene mainstream singles of all time, as the single to promote the record. So I thought of like the approach of like, you got to make what you got to make, and I think that no one disagreed with me. No one was trying to be like, come on guys, let's play ball. But they were, I guess, in a sense, kind of worried for what that decision would mean long term. And so we talked about it for a while, and that we said, you know what? We like it better this way. And we have to make the record based on those decisions, as opposed to, very pragmatic and very understandable, shrewd, because it wouldn't have been that egregious a compromise to change that song in that way. It's not like they asked us to like put, clean vocal harmonies all over, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
like it wouldn't be the end of the world to like, it wouldn't be an artistic compromising of your integrity.
Yeah. And that song probably would have been cool. Like I've written songs like that. It's not like it would have been a terrible song. But we liked it better the other way. So it was almost like a moment where we all put our hands in the middle and said like, screw it. Let's just do it the way that we want to do it.
We're going with it.
Yeah. And that, honestly, that colored the decision-making process of the band. We cited that moment again and again and
as
again.
you went forward.
Yeah. In the years ahead. The other notes were more like play ball with the other people beyond the label. Like they wanted us to include an explanation card in the record to explain away Dead by Dawn. This is a practice that had become popularized by kind of punk Christian bands, especially on Tooth and Nail, where you open the CD jewel case and then a little paper falls out that basically says, trust us, we're still Christians. This song is a metaphor. Yeah.
Right.
And I thought that was just such a goofy, like, I'm not saying that anybody else if it made sense for your band, then by all means. But for us, I was just like, it's so dorky. Like,
well, the bottom line is like, is the song a metaphor or not? Right.
And it wasn't.
And going back to like, the core
it's like,
thing.
it just is a song about a horror movie. And so, and they weren't like, you got to do it. They were just like, listen, if you don't do it, there's a possibility that some Christian bookstores might not carry it. And we're like, I guess we'll deal with it. You know what I mean? And at that time, Best Buy had become the place to buy Tooth and Nail records anyway, and they were cheaper than Christian bookstores. So we weren't that scared of it. But those were the kind of notes. It'd be like, well, listen, if you lean too far into this experimentation, or is it short enough? Is it long enough? The distributors can there be a version of Mouth Like a Magazine that's shorter for radio? That kind of thing. But they weren't breathing down our necks. They weren't like involved in. They mostly released us to be as weird as we wanted to be. Age of Reptiles was a turning point when they heard the demos for that record, and they called. I don't want to say with dollar signs in their eyes, but they were like, "Hey, listen, if you make more songs like this, we will have a hit record on our hands." You know what I mean? But I think they saw Nihilism for what it was. They were like, this is probably one of the weirder records we've released. People will either like it or they won't. So
Yeah. Well, that I think the time period between when Nihilism and Age of Reptiles was released, I think there was just a general shift in the what Tooth and Nail was like trying to like their business practices. I feel like just kind of shifted at that point, just based purely on like like what we've kind of seen, right?
No,
from
it's
those
true.
releases around that time.
We boarded the ship at a time when they were experiencing, I think, the greatest success of their tenure, not to be repeated before or after. And not because of us, because of bands much bigger than ours, but because their formula had created a few hit records, bands that normally probably wouldn't have had hit records were having way more success because they were on Tooth and Nail. So Tooth and Nail was becoming more of like a big presence in indie music, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, what I was going to say earlier actually also connects to kind of how you finished that thought, Josh, about the other comments you were getting from Tooth and Nail and other, outside sources. I don't know. I basically just wanted to gas you up a little bit and admit that, I'll start by saying I think Rick Rubin, who we've already invoked on this podcast, has popularized this idea for a lot of artists and just art appreciators out there that art is best made when the artist is the person that is considered first. Like you're considering your own opinion of what you're making and the audience last. And that actually serves the audience the most, right? Because if you're trying to be Marvel, if you're trying to like make the movie that everybody's going to love,
or if
do
you're
the
trying
fan
to
service thing.
Have you seen that thing, the Variety article that all these studios are now making fan like test groups and stuff, like to be part of the process of making movies? It's wild.
It's just the depth of creativity.
Yeah,
exactly.
For real.
It's a mess. And so I wanted to just kind of like echo what you're saying about your Trent Reznor story and that being your favorite album and that being the one that was maybe like the least commercially viable at the time, but how you resonated with it the most, right? So in a similar sense, like because you were inspired by his decision to double down and to like kind of lean into his own creative inspiration and not worry about the outside critique or voices, that enabled you to also see that as a viable option for yourself as an artist. And then that caused you to make it, and your bandmates to make an album that a lot of people resonated with. And honestly, if So Selfish It's Funny had been verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, and we're out, and it's 3 minutes long, I don't think I would like that song as much as I do. Like, I genuinely, I think it is the best version of that song that could possibly exist. And I love it. And I think it's like, because it's this weird, amorphous, linear, movement-based song, I think it's so fascinating and so compelling. And like, to underline the point, I think more artists should consider their taste and their preferences and feel free to come back to the label and say, like y'all did, hey, we respect your opinion. And it's cool to hear that about the conversation and know that it wasn't like this kind of pushy, critical thing, but that it was more of like a back and forth, and they were super supportive of y'all. But I love that this is an example of like an artist really sticking to their guns. And I think it helped y'all become like an incredible group and put on an incredible live show. I don't know. I just think it really bodes well for where art is headed when we trust kind of our compass and don't worry about all the outside stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, by the way.
But absolutely.
Our philosophy, or at least my philosophy, and I don't mean to say like mine was better than anyone else's. I'm sure that the guys would have agreed with this, but that, one of my favorite novelists, Bret Easton Ellis, who's written infamously divisive novels, was asked once, like, how often do you think about the reader when you write? And he's like, the direct quote is, I don't think about the reader ever, and I don't care. The reader is me.
Yeah, exactly.
So our approach was always like, for better or for worse, I would like to write the record I want to hear, and I would like the record I want to hear is one that doesn't exist, and that's not to say that we won't borrow from all kinds of influences and all that, but I think a lot of people were confused when we are maybe presenting inspiration during the nihilism period was refused, and in particular the shape of punk to come. But nihilism doesn't sound like the shape of punk to come. You can definitely hear the influence on
You
the
can
record.
tell it's an
Yeah.
an influence.
But refused. Who I have nothing. I mean, that's one of the most formational records. But that is a record where they use like really gainy, big guitars.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, sonically, it just doesn't sound like nihilism. I don't think that they were using Squires and Marshall.
Right. Yeah.
Instead, the inspiration comes through more philosophically. That's like, well, what if you could blend genres and not worry about whether or not it counts as punk rock? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I thought that, like, in the same way that I appreciate that about the Downward Spiral, the kinds of artists that I love the most are willing to make a record that me as the super fan might not like. And I think that that's like an interesting, challenging part. I like the kinds of discographies where there's a record and, for me, someone like Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds or even Flaming Lips, or, a record comes out and it's not instantaneously like, this is my favorite of all time. You're like, I don't even know if I like this one. But then you sit with it and you listen again and again and again, and then suddenly find yourself thinking like, this might be the best one.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
I think that that's reward. And I realize that attention spans are in decline and the entertainment industry isn't what it used to be in that regard. Even when, nihilism, 20 years ago, was released into a very different world of, primarily physical media and people who had to drive to a store to buy a CD and then bring it home and listen. So there was some level of investment. You can't really get people to stick around for a 43-minute runtime record and really sit with it unless they're already super fans or unless they're mining it for something to be offended by.
Yeah.
So I feel fortunate that we got to make that record at the time that we did. For a long time, I resented its belovedness in our discography because I felt as if a lot of fans who were open-minded enough to welcome that record weren't open-minded enough to then change with us as
Continue
we change.
with you. Yeah. Right.
But now I don't have any, like I listened to it all the way through in preparation for the last time Showbread played Furnace Fest because we played songs off, and I just found myself listening to the whole record. I'm like, I like it. I think it's a good record. I'm very proud to have been a part of it in the way that I was participatory. And I feel fortunate that we got to make something so banana. It's like really, really weird. And it's our best selling record. It doesn't make any sense. So I feel really fortunate that it came out when it did and that it found the audience that it did. If you ask people now, or, like there's, people have made little documentaries and things and they'll go around, why do you like this record? And they say, oh, it's different. It's different. It's different. Which wasn't a conscious decision. It was more just like what happened to come out. So I feel so grateful and honored that it found an audience. It's not a record that should have found an audience, and it did somehow.
Yeah. Man, well, you already answered very eloquently. My last question was going to be, how do you feel about the record now? 20 years later. That's usually how I end this, but we already did that.
It all up,
so,
I know.
So this is all free time now, I guess.
Well, what's
I've
funny
got more
about...
questions.
Oh, no, hit me.
So don't worry, Kylan. Well, I guess zooming out again and talking production, and I think it kind of segues okay because, like you said, Josh, if you feel like it's a record that shouldn't have found a fan base, but it did, which I love that it did. I also want to know, like, who was the mad scientist behind the Smokers and the Children, the weird Foley sketch that was like the people talking, and then the swarm of bugs, and then a military attack, and fire, and the big explosion, and then like the moody organ at the end of Dissonance of Discontent that has the thunderstorm, like all of these soundscapes and Foley sketches and all this stuff that adds texture and atmosphere and supports the aesthetic that you talk about that y'all brought to the live show as well, that was kind of horrific or campy, or like reptilian in the next record, like all these different aesthetics, right? Like if this is sort of the thesis statement or the starting place for your kind of like announcing who you are as a band and giving like context for like, we like the weird theatrical stuff and the cinematography that we can bring to the ear or to the live show experience. Who was the mad scientist? Was it Sylvia? Was it you? Was it a combination of the whole band? Speak to that a little bit, because I've just found that stuff endlessly fascinating and have always wondered like what was going on to create the connective tissue between all these songs to create this environment.
Well, we knew that with that record in particular, everyone had this idea that we wanted to somehow achieve some level of seamlessness that it would play cinematically, as opposed to a record like Age of Reptiles, which is designed aesthetically to be more like a succinct, and it's this song and then this song, like
kind of a
that
rock
record. Yeah, it's a traditional rocker, more straightforward down the middle. The aesthetic for Nihilism was to be sprawling and strange, and we looked referentially to albums like The Fragile by Nine Inch Nails or David Bowie's Low or Pink Floyd's The Wall, which play seamlessly. They're like soundboard odysseys,
Right.
But the way that those artists achieve that, like take David Bowie's Low, for example, which is one of my favorite Bowie records, they achieve that musically. So there's lots of sprawling soundscape instrumentals, and we weren't in a position to write and record a tremendous amount of extra like supplemental material. It's like I said, we rushed it out. So we were looking for like, well, what could we do? What could we do so that it doesn't just play like track 1, track 2, track 3, so that it feels like it's designed to be listened to from beginning to end. And a lot of that we hadn't figured out. And before we got to the studio, we were in the middle of recording. Sylvia in her studio had a library of just hundreds and hundreds of CDs. Of all types of genres on these gigantic shelves. And so at night when we were done with sessions, we'd go in and look through them and be like, has anyone heard this record? This is a true story. We'd take one that we'd never heard before, put it in and listen, just sit there and listen to it from start to finish on her big studio speakers.
That's awesome.
And then when it was done, we'd look around and be like, oh, it's pretty cool. Or that sucked, While we were in the process of doing that just for fun, we found that she had this huge library of audio samples on CD.
Okay.
And then you'd pick them up and turn them over, and it would be like, Natural Disaster or Swarm of Bees, and I went through and listened to all of them with a pen and paper, and I made notes on like, this one's kind of weird. I like this one. This one's cool. And then Sylvia came in the next day and saw my thing. She's like, what are you doing? I was like, I was going through all your sound libraries. You got all these amazing samples. She's like, you know what we should do? We could layer them. Like if you like this one and this one and this one, what if we tried to turn them into stories?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So awesome.
None of those are, they're all like the one that you're talking about, for example, with the bees and the army. It's probably like 16 different samples or something like that. It starts. I was
gonna ask if it was like some B-film footage that you found that you just dropped right into it, or if it was compiled. And I loved that it was compiled. That's incredible.
Yeah, and it was
16. Wow.
Like really, really campy and really like we were cracking up. We'd be like, oh, what if this disc has military on it? What if we make it sound like the military is coming in to deal with this infestation of bees? Yeah, they're fire, and we were dying. But then there were other times where it was like we'd be looking through the sound library for what else could we put on here that would supplement, like even in the song. And Dissonance of Discontent was one of those where Sylvia was just like, to me, it sounds almost like a funeral dirge or like a march.
Yes.
Yeah. What if there was like rain or something to implicate, like all these great funeral scenes in movies, like where the rain's pouring down and
moody, overcast.
And so we put like rain, and we added like thunderstorm, and that thunderclap totally arbitrarily happened to land exactly when Marvin hits the like that. We didn't line it up.
That's wild.
Okay. That moment.
I also wondered that. So Thanks for solving a mystery that I've had for 20 years.
Yeah, you can actually see in our, like our footage of the B-roll of us recording the record online. The moment that we hear it for the first time is in the footage where we all like, whoa, we can't believe that it just happened to line up perfectly. And then there were other things like there are a couple of like unlicensed samples. Don't tell anybody. Like the scream.
It's not like we're recording this. Don't worry.
Yeah, no one's gonna hear. Yeah, the scream right before "Welcome to Plainfield," Toby Hooper. There's me playing synth, and there's samples of like a freight elevator opening and closing, and then we added samples of like high heels in a parking garage, and then there's like kind of a ramp up, and then there's a scream from Evil Dead 2. So and Rich.
That's awesome.
Who's our rule follower, he'd be like, you can't put this on here without clearing it. And Sylvia would be like, nah, no one's going to know.
Yeah. That's also like the most Sam Raimi thing ever. Like, I feel like he would appreciate that. Like, that
totally.
feels like very much like punk rock, Evil Dead. Like, we're just a bunch of kids just like making shit together. Like,
we had done so many of them that like a tremendous amount of them didn't make the like sample soundscapes that took us hours to make eventually got cut from the record because the label and we actually agreed. They'd be like, dude, the record's like 55 minutes and 15 of it is samples. And we're like, you're probably right, we probably put too many.
It didn't stop Toby Mac, so I appreciate the brevity, the wisdom in which you guys decided to cut some of that.
One other little moment that I am pretty confident is not a sample, that is a little bit of a transition piece, is at the end of Mouth Like a Magazine, and I want to confirm it for the world here. True or untrue, Josh, the whispers at the end of that are you talking about your pet ferret Chester.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the
got it.
The sound that you're hearing, the like fuzzy kind of staticky thing, was actually a sampler that we programmed on a Korg MS 2000. So that's not like a sample, like it's actually being quote unquote performed. And then I talked through a megaphone, and Sylvia was like, what would be cool if there was just like some like some inaudible whispering that people would lean in and still not be able to decipher. And I was like, well, what should it be about? I haven't really. She was like, it's fine, record, And so I started to whisper things about my pet ferret, whose name was Chester. And I honestly thought like, we're just getting a level or something like that. And she insisted on it. She was like, I just really think that should be it. She's like, it's like the first thing that came to your mind. So it's like this Freudian.
Yeah. First thought, best thought. Right. And like, I mean, pet ferret, Chester, like those sounds are all very like, I don't know. They're exciting to the ear, especially when you're whispering them. It's almost like an ASMR kind of thing. Y'all were ahead of your time. Let's call it that.
Yeah. It's like the Showbread's legacy is the perfect combination of like lofty high art and the stupidest ideas.
Yeah, which once again, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, I was talking about that with the band name, like for weird, goofy kids who like also like art films. Like, it's perfect.
You struck a great balance. Well, speaking of Mouth Like a Magazine, I would love to know about the video. Was it as fun to make as it looked like it was?
Heck,
it looked like y'all were having a blast.
That thing was so awesome. I've never been a part of a video shoot that was that amazing. And get this, so we signed the contract. 10 days later, fly out to California to record. We left from California to toured all the way back to the East Coast to New York to film a video in New York City, like a week before the record came out or something like that. I mean, it was like, I can't believe this. These are all my dreams coming true. And that production company,
check the boxes.
Yeah, it was amazing. They had done, I think, something for Tooth and Nail, or maybe from a peer label. And Tooth and Nail was like, we'll send you to these guys. They're amazing and they're cheap. And they were willing to do videos for Showbread, He Is Legend, and The Chariot, all in the span of like a week or something like that. So I believe, and you can fact check this on your own time, but I believe that the He Is Legend video was The Seduction. I think it has like the puppets.
Is that the puppets? Yeah, that's The Seduction.
Same set as the Mouth Like a Magazine video. And then
That's cool.
they came and recorded the Chariot live. I wouldn't presume to know which song it was or anything, but they came and recorded the Chariot live on tour with us. And the reference that they were like, "Do you have any ideas for a video?" And we were like, "We know we want it to be performance based as opposed to like narrative based." Yeah. And I sent them "Capitalism Stole My Virginity" by the International Noise Conspiracy as a reference of the kind of performance based, something that showcased like the aesthetic of the band and uniform and that kind of thing. And I was like, I don't know, I just like a white room, maybe, so that because something that like makes it to where the band as a unit is the visual statement as opposed to like a set or something like that. And they were like, great, white room, we got it. The idea of the boxes and everything was entirely them. It's honestly an editing it's phenomenal.
It is.
It's one of the coolest music videos of all time. Like, it's one that like sticks in my head of like greatest music videos of all time.
Yeah, we got extremely those guys are awesome. They did an amazing job.
They crushed it.
The DP on the video, the director of photography, had been working on like Sex and the City.
Nice.
And they were all so nice that they didn't care that like we were like dorks and didn't know what we were doing. They just were like, we never made a video before. Obviously, you're going to fake it. We knew enough about, how videos work to do that kind of thing. And the very first take, a lot of the first take is in the video, especially in the last minute of it where it's really chaotic. They were like, I don't know, just play it like you would play it. And of course, we went as bananas as we could possibly go. And they're like, well, So the rest of the video was honestly a struggle because you have to kind of stand still so that they can like, this box is going to, this
tone
box.
it
And
down.
like, yeah, whatever. But I mean, that feels so fortunate to have been in that. That wasn't my doing. The videos I made for Showbread later are obviously very different. So it
Josh,
was.
I'm a little mad at you that you mentioned that the DP worked on Sex and the City, because the way my chaotic brain works, and as a video editor, I'm going to spend entirely too much time doing this, where I'm just going to randomly cut in to that music video heads of people from Sex and the City and see if
that'll be in the boxes. It'll just be
real life connection.
It's like the Roman thing.
It's true.
So Roman Haviland from Maylene told us that they filmed their music video. Josh, was it like the same cameras or the same camera crew that they used for
the same camera from Arrested Development?
From Arrested Development.
Arrested Development.
So then I literally spent 2 weeks of my life as an adult with a job and a child and other responsibilities, recutting the intro to Arrested Development with the members of Maylene.
Yeah, it's important.
So now I'm going to have to do this with Showbread and Sex and the City. So
I bless you and release you to this work.
Yes. I love getting the Josh stamp of approval on that.
We're getting a little close to the end of our time. Although I wish I could do this all day, and it feels like we all feel similarly. Lowercase Josh, do you have any questions? I'm gonna just use lowercase Josh after this too. That's gonna become.
I've gone from beautiful producer to just lowercase
known as
Josh.
Lowercase Josh.
Yeah. Okay. Well, following up the Mouth Like a Magazine thing, it's your most well-known song, and kind of like, I don't know, you could say your legacy song. So I was curious if you would rather have another song from this record.
That's a good question.
Or like, I would like to know one from this record, but you can also answer it again for any song from any other record, to be like, if you could pick what your most well-known song was, what would it be?
Yeah, that dovetails nicely into one of my questions, actually, which was going to be like, what's your favorite from this record? But I also, I like how Josh opened it up.
Yeah. Well, I think my favorite song on the album is "The Llama Eats a Giraffe." It's maybe the only Showbread song that we always played live from its inception to the end of our tenure in any set.
Wow.
Like, well, you gotta play Llama.
Gotta do it.
I really like how it came out. I like I like the tone that it sets for the record. It's in my opinion, a great opening track.
100%.
Yes.
I don't have any bad things to say about Mouth Like a Magazine. I think it's a cool song. I think that it's funny.
It's awesome.
It's funny that it made it like that song happened to be one that got written for that record. And it really was just like the coincidence of me, accidentally putting together C and F while I was playing on guitar. And it was kind of transitioned in a funny way together. I don't mind that it's like the one that people remember. It is catchy. It is memorable. I don't have any problem with catchy and memorable songs. And I think lyrically, it's an interesting song. Like
Yeah.
it could have definitely been something I liked less. So I like the word pictures in that song. And there's I tried to like kind of weave in several references to the Metamorphosis by Kafka throughout the record. So there's the one obvious track, but then there's a line in Mouth Like a Magazine, within the walls, I hear all of its legs, which is a reference to like kind of being on the other side of Gregor's bedroom in the Metamorphosis, and his sister hearing him walking around there. So I liked some of those word pictures. Ordinarily, I tend to think that whatever's most recent is the most interesting or exciting thing, because I think it would be really depressing if I thought the best things we'd ever done
was 20 years ago. Yeah.
And I think that my two favorites that I'd wish that, not wish that we'd be known for, but if I could pick, I guess, there's a song on the Cancer record called You Will Die in a Prison, which is second to last. There's You Were Born in a Prison, You Will Die in a Prison, and You Will Not Die in a Prison. But You Will Die in a Prison, which is kind of this long, epic, and very, very personal song, is one of, I think, probably the best Showbread songs. And there's a song on the most recent record that we made called Funeral Dirge for Everyone That You've Ever Known and Everyone That You Haven't, which I think is probably, in my opinion, the best Showbread song. No one will ever agree with me on that. They probably will be like, are you kidding? That's one of the worst Showbread songs ever written. But that's how it goes with songwriters. And
that's the beauty of art.
That's what we were
man.
just talking about it earlier. You know, like you got to go with what you like.
Yep.
Use your own taste.
That's awesome.
Really quickly, I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the Reese Roper of it all. How was working with Reese? Was that fun?
Oh, dude, that was amazing. So we were all big Five Iron and Brave Saint Saturn fans. In fact, most of us were bigger fans of Brave Saint Saturn. And The Light of Things Hoped For, that record in particular, like we just love. I mean, we played it again and again and again. And we knew that Brave Saint Saturn had been on Tooth and Nail. So we had a contact to get to Reese. And I think that I sent him an email, and then he's like, maybe, we jumped on a phone call. And he's like, I guess I could drive up, because he had been in California working on something on the Roper record, which is kind of like his self-titled pop punk thing. He's like, I'm actually in California, so I guess I could drive over if you guys don't mind just maybe paying for my gas. Because we were going to allocate funds in the budget to like pay him as, a guest musician, which would be entirely appropriate. He's like, no, you don't have to do that. Just if you don't mind like paying for some gas. And we're like, obviously
for some gas.
So he drove like for hours, didn't know us at all. And he hadn't heard the track or anything. So we played it for him. I gave him the lyrics. And he was like, dude, these are good. And, which to me was like, oh, thank God you said. I was worried that, he's such a gifted lyricist and obviously such a gifted vocalist. And we were trying not to be weirdos. We're all big fans of his. And he went and did like 3 takes. And what's on the record is probably like an edit of like those 3 takes. Yeah. And then we're like, well, you did it so fast. While you're here, do you mind singing some harmonies on this other song? So then we had him sing harmonies on Stabbing Art to Death.
Nice.
And then he was just like, thanks, guys. And he took off.
Bye.
But then
Faded into the night.
Yeah, we remained connected because of that, work. And we ended up, Showbread toured with Roper and played with Five Iron a handful of times. He sang on it on the Nervosa album. I talked to him through text a few months ago. And whenever they come through town,
any possibility of a return of the Thieves Guild, by the way?
Oh man, I wish. Yeah, maybe. We tried to start a band. Maybe
we can
him.
make it happen.
Come to fruition, but yeah, I'm still such a fan of his talent and his thinking. So that to me was just like a man. And it's weird. It's weird to have Reese Roper on this bizarre, like,
I love it
record. So to us, that was like,
so
it
makes
sense.
Because people at labor were like, you really want the ska guy? And we're like, yeah, that'd be so weird.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's the best.
Sweet. Okay, well, guys, I have a heart out. I'm so sorry. I think this is gonna about do it for us.
Can I give a quick shout out about You Hate Movies? Because we're talking podcasts. We got to talk about You Hate Movies.
You got to. It's important. Yeah. That's the Lord's work. You Hate Movies. If you want to hear a bunch of people argue about movies, which it doesn't sound like the most entertaining thing. You can find that in your own time, but believe me, this is like the kind of expert arguing you need to feel like an accomplished cinephile.
No, I love it. That's what I've been trying. I've been trying to turn this show into that, if I'm being honest. Pretty much every chance I get. In fact, I'm really remiss I didn't get to bring up Toby Hooper more because we're getting into spooky season.
That's true. Yeah.
Yep.
Josh, is there anything else you want people to know?
Like if anyone happens to be hearing this and still care about or be curious about the kind of stuff that, I'm doing, I continue to write books and make music, and JoshuaSPorter.com. It's all over
you've got
there.
a new one that just came out, right?
I do, yeah. I have a novel that just came out last week. So
Nice.
Congrats.
yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay, from all of us here at Church Names Now, may all your favorite bands stay together, and peace out, Montclairers.
Thanks for having me.